The morning mist clung to the ancient stones of St. Paul's Cathedral as Catherine, Princess of Wales, stepped from her car onto the cobbled forecourt. The weight of history pressed down upon the sacred ground where kings and queens had been crowned, married and mourned for centuries. Today marked something different. A vigil commemorating the very place where Charles had experienced his profound vision of succession, a moment that would reshape the monarchy's future. Catherine's navy blue coat fluttered in the October breeze as she paused, taking in the magnificent Baroque facade that had witnessed so much royal drama. The cathedral's twin towers stretched toward the gray London sky, their bells silent now in respectful preparation for the ceremony ahead. She had attended countless royal events, but this vigil held special significance. It honored not just a building, but the spiritual awakening that had guided her father-in-law's approach to kingship. Inside the cathedral, the atmosphere was thick with reverence. Hundreds of candles flickered in the vast space, their warm glow dancing across Christopher Wren's masterful architecture. The great dome soared overhead, its golden gallery catching the light like a crown suspended in the heavens. Catherine moved with practiced grace down the nave, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor worn smooth by centuries of worshippers. The assembled congregation rose as she approached. Politicians, clergy, and members of the royal household had gathered to witness this unique ceremony. Archbishop William stood at the altar, his vestments shimmering in the candlelight. Behind him, the magnificent carved reredos provided a backdrop of saints and angels, their stone faces seeming to watch over the proceedings with eternal patience. As Catherine took her place in the ornate chair reserved for her, she reflected on the story that had brought them all here. Years ago, when Charles was still Prince of Wales, he had come to St. Paul's during a period of personal crisis. The weight of his future responsibilities had seemed overwhelming, and he had sought solace in the cathedral's peaceful embrace. It was here, kneeling before the high altar, that he had experienced what he later described as a divine vision of his role as future king. The vision had shown him not as a distant monarch ruling from above, but as a servant leader, deeply connected to his people and their struggles. He had seen himself walking among citizens from all walks of life, listening to their concerns, and using his position to bridge divides rather than emphasize differences. This transformative moment had fundamentally altered his understanding of monarchy, shifting it from duty imposed by birth to service chosen through love. Catherine understood this transformation intimately. She had witnessed Charles's evolution from a sometimes struggling heir to a confident and compassionate king. His vision at St. Paul's had guided his entire approach to the throne, influencing everything from his environmental activism to his efforts to modernize the monarchy while preserving its essential dignity and purpose. The vigil began with a haunting chorale, peace that filled the cathedral's vast space. With ethereal beauty, the voices of the choir seemed to float upward, carried by the ancient acoustics toward the dome where they lingered like prayers made manifest. Catherine closed her eyes, allowing the music to wash over her, feeling the profound connection between past, present, and future that made moments like this so powerful. When she opened her eyes, her gaze fell upon the memorial plaque that had been installed to mark the exact spot where Charles had knelt during his vision. The bronze inscription read simply, "In this sacred place, vision became purpose, and purpose became service." The words were understated, but Catherine knew their power. They represented a monarchy transformed, crown worn not as ornament but as commitment. As the service continued, Catherine noticed the diverse faces in the congregation. There were immigrants who had found new homes in Britain, young people inspired by the royal family's environmental work, veterans who had served alongside military members of the royal family, and elderly citizens who remembered the darker days when the monarchy had seemed more distant and formal. All had come to honor not just a building or a moment, but an ideal of leadership rooted in genuine care for others. The Archbishop began his homily, speaking about the nature of divine calling and how it could transform even the most reluctant hearts. He spoke of Moses, who had argued with God about his fitness to lead, and of David, who had been chosen from among his brothers despite being the youngest and seemingly least qualified. The parallels to Charles's own journey were clear. Though never explicitly stated, Catherine felt a surge of pride as she thought about her husband William and how he too was being shaped by his father's vision. The future king had embraced the same principles of service over privilege, using his platform to highlight mental health issues, environmental conservation, and social justice. The vision that had begun at St. Paul's was creating a legacy that would extend far into the future. The candles continued to flicker as prayers were offered in multiple languages, reflecting the Commonwealth's diversity. Each flame seemed to represent a life touched by the monarchy's evolution, a person who had benefited from the more accessible and compassionate approach that Charles's vision had inspired. The cathedral had become not just a place of worship, but a symbol of unity and hope. As the first portion of the vigil concluded, Catherine rose with the congregation for a moment of silent reflection. In that silence, she could almost feel the presence of all who had stood in this sacred space before them, kings and commoners, saints and sinners, all united in their humanity and their need for guidance and grace. The weight of her own future responsibilities settled gently on her shoulders. But rather than feeling burdened, she felt empowered. The vision that had transformed Charles continued to guide their family's service to the nation and Commonwealth. St. Paul's Cathedral had witnessed the birth of a new kind of monarchy, and tonight's vigil ensured that its memory would endure for generations to come. The second phase of the vigil began as Archbishop Williams invited the congregation to participate in a reading from the Book of Samuel, chosen specifically for its themes of unexpected leadership and divine selection. Catherine listened intently as voices from different sections of the cathedral took turns reading verses, creating a tapestry of accents and inflections that reflected modern Britain's rich diversity. A young woman from Birmingham read about Samuel's search for a new king, her voice clear and confident as it carried across the vast space. Following her, an elderly gentleman from Scotland continued the passage, his weathered voice speaking of David's anointing with oil, the symbol of divine favor flowing down upon one chosen not for his obvious qualifications, but for the content of his heart. Catherine found herself deeply moved by this communal reading. It reminded her of Charles's own unexpected journey to understanding his role. Like David, he had not initially seemed the obvious choice for transformational leadership. Critics had questioned his readiness, his sometimes unconventional views, his passionate advocacy for causes that seemed ahead of their time. Yet his vision at St. Paul's had revealed a deeper truth about the nature of true leadership, the reading concluded, with the congregation reciting together the final verse about David becoming a shepherd to his people. The collective voices created a powerful resonance that seemed to make the cathedral's stones themselves vibrate with meaning. Catherine felt goosebumps rise on her arms as hundreds of voices joined in perfect unison, each person contributing to something larger than themselves. Following the reading, a series of testimonials began. These had been carefully selected to illustrate how Charles's transformed approach to monarchy had touched real lives across the United Kingdom and Commonwealth. The first speaker was Maria Santos, Portuguese immigrant who had started a community garden in London's East, and with support from the Prince's Trust during Charles's early years of service. Maria stepped to the lectern with quiet dignity. Her English accented but clear, she spoke of arriving in London with nothing but hope and determination, struggling to find work and community in an unfamiliar country. The Prince's Trust had not only provided funding for her garden project but had connected her with other immigrants and local residents who shared her vision of bringing fresh food and green space to their urban neighborhood. Future King could have remained distant, Maria said, her voice growing stronger with each word. But his vision of service brought him to our small plot of land. He knelt in the dirt with us, planting seeds and listening to our dreams. That day, I understood that this was not a monarchy that rules over people, but one that grows alongside them. The congregation listened in respectful silence as Maria described how her community garden had become a model for similar projects across London. More importantly, she spoke of how Charles's personal involvement had inspired other members of the royal family to embrace similar hands-on approaches to their charitable work. The vision at St. Paul's had created ripple effects that continued to expand outward. Touching lives in ways that traditional royal patronage never could, the next speaker was Dr. James O'Coffer, a climate scientist whose research had been championed by Charles long before environmental concerns became mainstream political issues. Dr. O'Coffer spoke with passionate precision about the early days when few politicians would listen to warnings about climate change, and how Charles's environmental advocacy had provided crucial support for scientific research and public awareness campaigns. His Majesty understood that true leadership means seeing around corners. Dr. O'Coffer explained, his Nigerian accent adding musical quality to his words. While others focused on immediate political gains, he focused on the legacy we would leave for our children. His vision at this cathedral included not just the people of today, but the generations yet to be born. Catherine nodded slightly as Dr. O'Coffer described Charles's prescient understanding of environmental challenges. She remembered conversations with William about how his father's early environmental work had seemed radical at the time, but had proven remarkably forward-thinking. The vision at St. Paul's had encompassed not just immediate service, but long-term stewardship of the planet itself. The third testimonial came from Sarah Mitchell, a veteran who had served in Afghanistan and later struggled with post-traumatic stress disorder. Her voice trembled slightly as she described her darkest moments after returning home. When the transition from military service to civilian life had seemed impossible to navigate successfully, I met Prince William at a veterans event, Sarah said, her composure strengthening as she continued. But it was clear that his approach to veterans issues came directly from his father's vision of personal engagement. Instead of formal speeches and photo opportunities, they created spaces for real conversation and genuine support. Sarah described how the royal family's military charities had evolved under Charles's influence to address not just physical needs but emotional and psychological challenges as well. The programs focused on treating veterans as whole people rather than simply former soldiers, acknowledging their ongoing contributions to society while providing practical support for their transitions. Vision that began in this cathedral extended to understanding that service members continue to serve their communities long after they leave the military, Sarah explained. That insight has saved lives and restored hope for thousands of veterans and their families. As each speaker shared their story, Catherine began to see the full scope of how Charles's spiritual experience at St. Paul's had transformed not just his own understanding of monarchy, but the entire institution's relationship with the people it served. The vision had created a new paradigm of royal service that emphasized personal connection, authentic engagement, and long-term impact over short-term publicity. The testimonials concluded with words from Father Patrick McMahon, an Irish priest who had worked with Charles on interfaith dialogue initiatives. Father McMahon spoke eloquently about how the king's vision had embraced not just Christian service, but genuine respect for all faith traditions within the Commonwealth. The cathedral where we gather tonight represents one tradition, Father McMahon said, his voice carrying the musical cadences of his homeland, but the vision born here embraces the full spectrum of human spiritual experience. His Majesty understood that true unity comes not from uniformity, but from respect for our beautiful diversity. As the testimonials ended, Catherine felt overwhelmed by the breadth and depth of Charles's impact. The vision at St. Paul's had indeed been transformational, creating a monarchy that served as a bridge between traditions rather than a barrier between them. The vigil was revealing not just a moment of personal revelation, but the birth of an entirely new approach to constitutional monarchy in the modern world. The cathedral bells began a gentle chiming as the vigil entered its most contemplative phase. Archbishop Williams invited the congregation to join in a period of guided meditation, encouraging them to reflect on their own callings to service and the ways in which they might contribute to the common good. The soft resonance of the bells provided a peaceful backdrop as hundreds of people settled into quiet introspection. Catherine closed her eyes and allowed her mind to wander back through her own journey to this moment. She remembered her first meeting with William, how nervous she had been about the implications of dating someone whose life was so thoroughly mapped out by duty and tradition. At that time, she could never have imagined sitting in St. Paul's Cathedral as the Princess of Wales, participating in a ceremony that honored the very vision that had shaped her husband's understanding of his future role. The meditation deepened as Archbishop Williams spoke softly about the nature of service and sacrifice. His words floated through the vast space like incense, settling gently into the hearts and minds of those gathered. He spoke of how true leadership required not just the courage to make difficult decisions, but the humility to listen deeply to others and the wisdom to change course when circumstances demanded it. As Catherine reflected on these words, she found herself thinking about the countless people she had met during her royal duties. Each encounter had taught her something new about the complexity and beauty of human experience. From the children at the hospital who faced their illnesses with remarkable courage, to the elderly residents of care homes who shared stories of wartime resilience, to the young entrepreneurs building businesses while supporting their communities, all had demonstrated forms of leadership that had nothing to do with titles or positions. The vision that Charles had experienced at St. Paul's had recognized this fundamental truth, that every person possessed the potential for meaningful contribution to society. The monarch's role was not to rule over subjects, but to serve alongside citizens, using the unique platform of the crown to amplify voices that might otherwise go unheard and to bridge gaps that might otherwise divide communities. During the meditation, Catherine became aware of subtle movements throughout the cathedral. People were lighting additional candles, each flame representing a personal commitment to service inspired by the ceremony. The gradual brightening of the space created a powerful visual metaphor for how individual actions could combine to illuminate the darkness that sometimes threatened to overwhelm the world. She opened her eyes to see a young boy, perhaps 8 years old, carefully lighting a candle with the help of his grandmother. The child's face was serious with concentration, clearly understanding that this was an important moment, even if he might not fully grasp all its implications. Catherine smiled, thinking of her own children and how they were already beginning to understand their future responsibilities to serve others. The meditation period concluded with a beautiful piece of instrumental music performed by a string quartet positioned in the choir stalls. The melody was both ancient and contemporary, weaving traditional hymn tunes with modern harmonies that spoke to the timeless nature of the human desire to serve something greater than oneself. As the music played, Archbishop Williams began the central prayer of the vigil. This prayer had been specially composed to honor Charles's vision while acknowledging the ongoing work needed to fulfill its promise. The Archbishop's voice rose and fell with the rhythms of centuries-old liturgical tradition. Yet his words spoke directly to contemporary challenges and hopes. "Grant us wisdom," he intoned, "to see beyond the divisions that separate us to the common humanity that unites us. Grant us courage to speak truth to power while showing compassion to the powerless. Grant us humility to learn from those we serve, even as we seek to serve them faithfully." The congregation joined in responsive prayers that had been translated into multiple languages. Reflecting the Commonwealth's linguistic diversity, Catherine heard phrases in Hindi, Swahili, French, and Gaelic, each language adding its own musical quality to the collective prayer. This multilingual approach exemplified the inclusive vision that had emerged from Charles's spiritual experience at the cathedral. Following the prayers, a surprise element was introduced to the vigil. Children from local schools began processing down the cathedral aisles, each carrying a small artwork they had created depicting their own visions of community service and leadership. The drawings and paintings were simple but powerful, showing teachers helping students, doctors caring for patients, neighbors sharing food with families in need, and environmental workers planting trees and cleaning waterways. The children's artwork created a gallery of hope along the cathedral walls, their innocent yet profound interpretations of service providing a fresh perspective on the themes of the evening. Catherine watched with delight as the young artists proudly displayed their creations, their excitement infectious. Even in the solemn atmosphere of the vigil, one particularly striking piece caught her attention. A painting by a 10-year-old named Amara that showed a diverse group of people building a bridge together. The bridge stretched across what appeared to be a river, with people of different ages, ethnicities, and abilities working side by side to connect to communities. The simplicity of the child's vision captured something profound about the nature of true leadership. Archbishop Williams invited Amara to share her thoughts about her artwork with the congregation. The young girl approached the lectern with remarkable composure, adjusting the microphone with the help of a cathedral steward before speaking in a clear, confident voice. "I painted people building a bridge because that's what leaders do," Amara explained, her words carrying remarkable wisdom for someone so young. "They help people who are on different sides come together. The bridge isn't just made of stone, it's made of people caring about each other." The congregation responded with gentle applause, and Catherine felt tears forming in her eyes. The child's insight perfectly captured the essence of Charles's vision. That leadership was fundamentally about connection, understanding, and mutual support, rather than dominance or control. As the children's presentation concluded, Catherine noticed how the combination of their artwork and the traditional grandeur of the cathedral had created something entirely new. The ancient stones and modern expressions of hope seemed to complement each other perfectly, suggesting that the future of the monarchy lay not in choosing between tradition and innovation, but in finding ways to honor the past while embracing positive change. The vigil was, demonstrating that Charles's vision at St. Paul's had indeed planted seeds that were continuing to grow in unexpected directions. The children's participation showed that the next generation was already internalizing the lessons of servant leadership, carrying forward the transformation that had begun with a moment of spiritual insight in this very space. The vigil took an unexpected turn as Archbishop Williams announced a special segment dedicated to sharing stories from Commonwealth nations about how Charles's transformed approach to monarchy had influenced international relations and development work. Catherine had not been aware this portion was planned, making her anticipation all the more genuine as representatives from various countries prepared to speak. The first to approach the lectern was Dr. Edouard Mensa, Ghana's High Commissioner to the United Kingdom. Her colorful kente cloth stole draped over her formal dress created a striking visual bridge between African tradition and British ceremony. Dr. Mensa spoke with eloquent passion about how Charles's environmental advocacy had supported reforestation projects across West Africa long before climate change became a global priority. When the future king visited Ghana 15 years ago, Dr. Mensa began, her voice carrying the musical cadences of her homeland. He did not come as a tourist seeking photo opportunities with exotic wildlife. He came as a student, eager to learn from our traditional forest management practices and to understand how ancient wisdom might inform modern conservation efforts. Catherine remembered hearing about that particular trip, how Charles had spent days in remote villages, learning about sustainable farming techniques and traditional ecological knowledge. His approach had been revolutionary for a member of the royal family, instead of brief ceremonial visits. He had engaged in extended, substantive learning experiences that honored local expertise while building genuine partnerships. Dr. Mensa continued her testimony by describing how Charles's support had helped establish community-based conservation programs that had restored thousands of hectares of degraded forest land. More importantly, these programs had been designed and led by local communities rather than imposed by foreign experts, reflecting the collaborative approach that had emerged from his vision at St. Paul's. The transformation we witnessed was not just in our landscapes, Dr. Mensa explained, but in our understanding of what partnership between nations could look like. Instead of the old colonial model of extraction and exploitation, we experienced a new model based on mutual learning and shared responsibility for our planet's future. The next speaker was Marcus Wellington, a young man from Jamaica who had participated in the Duke of Edinburgh's International Award Program. Marcus spoke with infectious enthusiasm about how the program had expanded under Charles's influence to include greater emphasis on community service and cultural preservation alongside Traditional outdoor challenges. Prince's vision recognized that adventure and service weren't separate activities, Marcus said, his Jamaican accent adding warmth to his words. Real adventure comes from stepping outside your comfort zone to help others, and real service requires the courage to tackle difficult challenges. Marcus described his award project, which had involved documenting traditional Jamaican folk stories from elderly community members and creating a digital archive to preserve these narratives for future generations. The project had connected him with village elders, whose wisdom might otherwise have been lost. While developing his own skills in technology and storytelling, Catherine was struck by how Marcus's experience embodied the intergenerational bridge building that Charles's vision had emphasized. The young man's work had honored the past while preparing for the future, creating connections across age groups that strengthened the entire community. The testimonies from Commonwealth representatives revealed a pattern of engagement that went far beyond traditional diplomatic relations. Charles's approach had emphasized long-term relationship building over short-term political gains, cultural exchange over cultural dominance, and collaborative problem-solving over unilateral action. Dr. Priya Sharma from India spoke about renewable energy partnerships that had emerged from Charles's early recognition that environmental challenges required global cooperation. Her crisp accent and precise diction conveyed both warmth and expertise as she described solar installation projects that had brought electricity to remote villages while training local technicians in maintenance and repair. The vision that began at St. Paul's understood that true prosperity comes from lifting others up, not keeping them down, Dr. Sharma observed. The renewable energy partnerships created jobs, reduced emissions, and demonstrated that environmental protection and economic development could work hand in hand. Catherine found herself deeply moved by these international perspectives on Charles's transformation. She had always known that his environmental and social justice work had global impact, but hearing specific examples of how his vision had influenced policy and practice across multiple continents gave her new appreciation for the far-reaching implications of that spiritual moment at St. Paul's. The Commonwealth testimonies concluded with words from Robert Fraser, a Canadian Indigenous rights advocate who had worked with Charles on issues of land rights and cultural preservation. Robert spoke with quiet dignity about how the future king's approach to Indigenous issues had differed markedly from historical royal attitudes toward Native peoples. When Charles visited our communities, Robert said, his voice carrying the measured cadence of someone accustomed to speaking truth to power, he came not as conqueror or patron, but as someone genuinely seeking to understand our perspectives and to support our self-determination. His vision recognized that Indigenous knowledge systems had valuable contributions to make to modern challenges. Robert described collaborative projects that had combined traditional ecological practices with contemporary conservation science, creating innovative approaches to environmental stewardship that honored both Indigenous sovereignty and scientific methodology. These partnerships had become models for similar work around the world. Following the international testimonies, Archbishop Williams invited the congregation to participate in a candle-passing ceremony, starting from the memorial plaque marking the site of Charles's vision. Participants began passing small candles from person to person throughout the cathedral. Each candle represented a commitment to carry forward some aspect of the servant leadership vision in their own lives and communities. Catherine received her candle from a young refugee who had found sanctuary in Britain through one of Charles's supported organizations. The woman whispered a quiet thank you in Arabic as she passed the flame, and Catherine felt the weight of responsibility and privilege that came with her position. The candle's warm glow seemed to embody the hope and possibility that had emerged from Charles's spiritual transformation. As hundreds of candles were lit and passed throughout the cathedral, the space filled with a gentle golden radiance that made the ancient stones seem alive with warmth. The sight was breathtakingly beautiful, but Catherine understood that the real beauty lay in what the ceremony represented. Thousands of individuals committing to be lights in their own communities, Carrying forward the vision of service that had been born in this sacred space, the candle ceremony concluded with all participants raising their flames simultaneously, creating a constellation of light that seemed to reach toward the cathedral dome. In that moment, Catherine felt she understood something profound about the nature of legacy and the way that individual transformation could ripple outward to change the world. As the candle ceremony concluded, Archbishop Williams called for a period of silent reflection, asking the congregation to consider how they might personally embody the vision of service that had transformed the monarchy. In the hushed atmosphere that followed, Catherine found herself thinking not just about her current role, but about the future she would help shape alongside William when their time came to lead. The silence was profound but not empty. It was filled with the weight of shared purpose and collective commitment. Catherine could sense the mental and spiritual activity happening throughout the cathedral as hundreds of people contemplated their own callings to service. The gentle flickering of candles provided the only movement in the vast space, their dancing flames casting shifting shadows on the ancient walls. During this contemplative period, Catherine's thoughts turned to her children and the legacy they would inherit. George, Charlotte, and Louis were growing up in a monarchy fundamentally different from the one their grandfather had inherited. The vision at St. Paul's had created a template for royal service that emphasized accessibility, authenticity, and genuine care for others over formal protocol and distant dignity. She thought about the conversations she and William had about preparing their children for their future roles. They wanted to raise them with a clear understanding of their responsibilities while ensuring they developed the empathy and practical skills needed to serve effectively in a rapidly changing world. The transformation that had begun with Charles's vision would need to continue evolving with each new generation. The period of reflection was gently interrupted by the beginning of the vigils. Penultimate segment, a musical journey through hymns and songs that had special significance to Charles's spiritual development. The cathedral's magnificent organ began with a piece by Bach that Charles had often cited as particularly meaningful to him during times of uncertainty and prayer. The music filled every corner of the vast space, the organ's thousands of pipes creating layers of harmony that seemed to make the air itself vibrate with divine presence. Catherine felt the music wash over her like a benediction. Understanding why Charles found such solace and inspiration in these ancient melodies, there was something about the combination of mathematical precision and emotional depth in Bach's compositions that spoke to both the mind and the heart. Following the organ solo, the cathedral choir joined with selected members of the congregation in singing Jerusalem, William Blake's mystical poem set to Perry's stirring melody. The choice was particularly meaningful, given Blake's vision of spiritual transformation and social justice, themes that had profoundly influenced Charles's own understanding of his role. Catherine added her voice to the hundreds singing about building Jerusalem in England's green and pleasant land. The words took on new meaning in the context of the evening's celebration, representing not just patriotic sentiment, but a genuine commitment to creating a more just and compassionate society. As the hymn concluded, a children's choir from local schools took their places in the choir stalls. Their pure, clear voices began a contemporary piece that had been specially commissioned for the vigil. The song told the story of a vision that became action, of service that grew from seeds of spiritual insight, and of hope that spread from one heart to many. The children's performance was both technically excellent and emotionally moving. Their youth seemed to embody the future that Charles's vision had sought to create, a generation that understood leadership as service and saw diversity as strength rather than challenge. Catherine watched with particular attention to the choir's composition, noting how it reflected London's beautiful multicultural reality. Following the children's performance, Archbishop Williams approached the lectern for what would be his final reflection of the evening. His words drew together the various threads of testimony, music, and ceremony that had woven through the vigil, creating a tapestry of meaning that honored both the past and the future. Night. We have gathered in a place where vision became reality, the Archbishop began. his voice carrying clearly through the cathedral's excellent acoustics. We have heard how one moment of spiritual clarity has rippled outward to touch lives across our nation and throughout the Commonwealth. We have seen how personal transformation can become institutional change, and how institutional change can serve personal transformation. He paused, allowing his words to settle into the hearts and minds of those gathered before continuing with even greater emphasis. But perhaps most importantly, we have been reminded that vision without action remains merely dream, and action without vision becomes merely activity. The gift of this place, the gift of this evening, and the gift of the example we celebrate is the demonstration that spiritual insight and practical service can work together to heal our broken world. Catherine found herself nodding slightly as the Archbishop's words resonated deeply with her own understanding of royal duty. She had seen firsthand how Charles's transformed approach to monarchy had influenced William's development as a future king, and how both men had struggled to balance the spiritual dimensions of their calling with the practical demands of modern royal life. The Archbishop concluded his reflection by inviting the congregation to consider what new visions might be born in this sacred space, what future transformations might emerge from tonight's gathering, and what legacy each person present might leave for the generations yet to come. As his words faded into the cathedral's vast silence, Catherine felt a profound sense of privilege at being part of this moment. The vigil had been more than a ceremony of commemoration. It had been a renewal of commitment to the ideals that Charles's vision had embodied. The organ began a gentle postlude as the formal portion of the vigil drew to its close. The music provided a bridge between the intensity of the ceremony and the quieter reflection that would follow as participants began to process their experiences and consider their own next steps. Catherine remained seated as others began to move about the cathedral, taking time to absorb the full impact of what she had witnessed. The vigil had revealed the depth and breadth of Charles's transformation in ways that surprised even her, and had demonstrated how individual spiritual experience could indeed reshape institutions and touch countless lives. The candles continued to flicker throughout the cathedral, their warm light creating an atmosphere of hope and possibility that seemed to promise great things for the future. As Catherine prepared to join the final phase of the vigil, she felt grateful for the opportunity to witness and participate in this celebration of vision becoming reality. The final phase of the vigil began with an unexpected invitation from Archbishop Williams. Rather than concluding with traditional formalities, he asked Catherine if she would share her own reflections on the evening and on the ongoing evolution of royal service. The request caught her by surprise, but she understood immediately that this was an opportunity to speak not just as the Princess of Wales, but as someone who had witnessed firsthand the transformation the vigil was celebrating. Catherine rose from her seat with characteristic grace, accepting the Archbishop's offered hand as she approached the lectern. The cathedral fell into expectant silence, hundreds of faces turning toward her in the gentle candlelight. For a moment, she stood quietly, gathering her thoughts and drawing strength from the sacred atmosphere that surrounded her. Your Grace. Distinguished guests, friends, she began, her clear voice carrying easily through the vast space. Tonight has been extraordinary in ways I had not anticipated when I arrived this evening. We came to commemorate a moment of vision, but we have experienced something much deeper, a renewal of purpose and a rekindling of hope. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the diverse congregation that had gathered to honor Charles's spiritual transformation. In their faces she could see the same sense of inspiration and commitment that she felt stirring within herself. The stories we have heard tonight remind us that leadership is not about commanding from a distance. Those we serve, Catherine continued, her confidence growing with each word. The vision that transformed His Majesty's understanding of monarchy was fundamentally about connection to community, to purpose, and to the divine calling that asks us all to serve something greater than ourselves. As Catherine spoke, she found herself thinking about her own journey from a relatively private life to one lived constantly in the public eye. The transition had been challenging, but the vision that had guided Charles had also provided a roadmap for her own development as a working member of the royal family. What strikes me most about the testimonies we have heard is how they demonstrate that genuine service creates more service, she observed, warming to her theme. When we commit ourselves authentically to helping others, we inspire others to make similar commitments. The vision that began in this cathedral has multiplied into thousands of smaller visions, each one contributing to the healing our world so desperately needs. Catherine's words seemed to resonate powerfully with the congregation. She could see people nodding in recognition, their own experiences reflected in her observations about the ripple effects of committed service. As someone who has had the privilege of working alongside the King and my husband in our charitable endeavors, I have seen how the vision born in this cathedral continues to evolve and adapt to new challenges, she continued. Climate change, mental health awareness, social inequality. These are not problems that can be solved by traditional approaches to authority and governance. They require the kind of collaborative, humble leadership that grows from spiritual insight and genuine care for others. The princess's voice grew more passionate as she spoke about the future challenges facing the monarchy and the nation. Her words carried both conviction and vulnerability, acknowledging the difficulties ahead while expressing confidence in the foundation that Charles's transformation had provided. The children who participated in tonight's vigil give me tremendous hope, Catherine said, her eyes lighting up as she thought about the young artists who had shared their visions of community service. They already understand intuitively what took many of us years to learn, that real strength comes from lifting others up, that real security comes from caring for our neighbors, and that real leadership comes from listening more than speaking. As Catherine concluded her reflections, she issued a gentle challenge to the congregation that surprised even herself with its boldness. Tonight, we have honored a vision that transformed a future king into a servant leader, she said, her voice carrying a note of prophecy that seemed to emerge from the sacred atmosphere itself. But visions are not museum pieces to be admired and forgotten. They are living forces that demand action, growth, and renewal in each generation. The Archbishop stepped forward as Catherine finished speaking, leading the congregation in a final prayer of dedication and blessing. His words wove together themes from throughout the evening, creating a spiritual conclusion that felt both complete and open-ended, honoring what had been accomplished while acknowledging how much work remained to be done. As the formal vigil concluded, something unexpected happened. Rather than filing out immediately, small groups of participants began gathering throughout the cathedral to continue conversations that had been sparked by the evening's events. The candles that had been lit during the ceremony continued to burn their warm light, creating intimate spaces for ongoing reflection and discussion. Catherine found herself surrounded by people eager to share their own stories of service and to explore ways they might contribute to the vision the vigil had celebrated. She listened with genuine interest to a teacher from Manchester who had developed innovative programs for supporting refugee children, to a businessman from Cardiff who had restructured his company to prioritize environmental sustainability, and to a retired nurse from Edinburgh who had organized neighborhood support networks for elderly residents. Each conversation reinforced the evening's central message about the power of individual transformation to create broader social change. Catherine realized that she was witnessing the birth of new commitments and partnerships that would extend the vigil's impact far beyond the cathedral walls. As the evening gradually wound down, Catherine took one final moment to stand before the memorial plaque that marked the site of Charles's vision. The bronze inscription seemed to glow in the candlelight, its simple words carrying profound weight. In this sacred place, vision became purpose, and purpose became service. Looking up at the magnificent dome that soared above her, Catherine offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the opportunity to participate in this remarkable celebration. The vigil had not just honored the past, but had planted seeds for the future. The vision that had transformed Charles would continue to evolve and grow, carried forward by each person who had been touched by the evening's events. As Catherine finally prepared to leave the cathedral, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction and anticipation. The vigil at St. Paul's had demonstrated that the monarchy's transformation was not a completed project, but an ongoing journey of growth and service. The work of building a more just and compassionate society would continue, guided by the vision. that had been born in this sacred space and renewed by the commitment of all who had gathered to honor its legacy. The ancient stones of St. Paul's Cathedral had witnessed another pivotal moment in the ongoing story of British monarchy. And the candles that continued to flicker throughout the vast space seemed to promise that the light of servant leadership would continue to shine brightly into the future.